The people who lost big time were the ones who said, "Oh, I never raise the rents. I just want everything to be smooth and easy, and I like my tenants, and I want to be generous." Those are the people who are being punished by the new law.
Hi, this is Chris German from the Apartment Dealer, and with me today is Mr. Steven Spierer. Steve has been practicing law for the past 4 decades
42 years.
and belongs to the law firm of Spierer, Woodward, Corbelis, Goldberg. And aside of the vast storehouse of knowledge that Steve brings inside the courtroom, Steve himself has ownership. It's now over 2,000 units?
2,300 apartment units in California, Colorado, Washington, and Arizona.
So he knows a little bit about the management and structuring of a real estate transaction. So we're excited to have Steve with us and share also at the end some questions you've had for him. So Steve, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Now we've been at this, when I say this, the educational luncheon for about 10 years now. And for the first 7, it was always the usual issues landlords were having. Tenants paying rent late and being a nuisance to a neighboring tenant. But the last 3 years, we've had this buildup of issues that landlords never had to face before. We had comfort animals entered into the scene, the legalization of marijuana, now people smoking in your building, even if you have a no smoking policy. But the most horrendous of all is with the passage of rent control. Now, we're 1 month in. It's not like the market has fallen apart or something like this, because there were some screaming from the rooftops that this was the end of all the good things multifamily, and obviously that's not the case. But what do you see either between buyers and sellers and transactions of last time the rent increases were given, or maybe there's been some issues there, some challenges, or issues you're seeing clients having already with tenant-landlord relations?
The main problems that I've begun to see, I have really not come from the tenants, they've come from the landlords themselves, because what the landlords are trying to do are figure out clever ways to raise the rent. And I don't encourage that. I think it's a good way to have some tenant organization or tenant-oriented law firm try to make an example of you. What I would suggest instead is, right now, the limits are 5% plus inflation per year. Raise your rents to those limits, and there's some argument over how much inflation should be looked at and so forth. But you can certainly raise your rents 6%, probably raise them 7%. Some people are being a little more aggressive than that. But get your rents up to market. That's really the key, and do it year over year over year. We expect that the restrictions will become more strong. It'll be harder to raise rents that much in the future, so do it now. Once you get the rents up to market, then just keep them at market. It's that simple. We still have vacancy decontrol, except in the jurisdictions where you don't anyway. And you can still evict tenants, although it's with cause. There are plenty of causes that can be used if that's what you need to do. But if you're a landlord who is simply trying to get rents to market, don't panic. Just do it. Get them there within the limits of the law, and then keep them there. The people who lost big time were the ones who said, "Oh, I never raise the rents. I just want everything to be smooth and easy, and I like my tenants, and I want to be generous." Those are the people who are being punished by the new law, and I don't think intentionally. And the people who kept their rents at market are the ones who are reaping the rewards of it, because there's really no impact so far from any of the new rent control law.
Now, many assume this is just the tip of the iceberg. The gentleman, and I forget his name now, but in 2018, who pushed to have rent control on the ballot, and we as Californians voted against it, and yet now here we are, it's law, vows to come back again. He feels that the 5% plus CPI is still too high. It was a move in the right direction, but he knows better, and really it should be 3%. Do you see things headed in that direction? Being an investor, do you have any sentiment about that issue yourself?
Yes. My view as an owner of hundreds and hundreds of California rental properties, rental units, I'm not concerned about it at all. Yes, I think he's going to push. I think he'll push successfully. I think the environment politically in California is still such that rent control will get tighter. Those limits will get lower. The permitted increases will be smaller, but it's going to take time, and there's going to be resistance. Also, California has not had a Republican statewide elected office for years now, and the supermajority in the state legislature, in both the Assembly and the Senate, in favor of the Democrats, leaves it so they can do whatever they feel like. And they haven't done it. They did this, but they haven't made more changes. They're moving gingerly because the concern that they have is if they move too quickly, then the frog that's being slowly boiled in the water will react and jump out of the pot. And as a consequence, they're moving sufficiently slowly that landlords who follow the law and who run their places cleanly, so they're habitable and they're proper places for tenants and human beings to live, those people will not have a problem. Keep running the property right, keep raising your rents within the limits to the market, and you'll be in plenty of time for whatever legislation comes next.
Now, for the politicians, they feel like, well, the landlords are making much ado about nothing. They should be happy that we've given them 5% plus inflation. But from the landlord's perspective, they're building what I like to call their financial legacy. Many of them many of our clients either currently rely on their rentals as the vast majority of their retirement income, or one day in the future, their rentals will represent the vast majority of their income. And so they had projections based upon raising rents, and now that's been stymied. And so when we frame this conversation about multifamily, I like to talk about three pillars. The first being maximization. Many investors are not fully maximizing what they currently own. So even before they think about expanding and doing different things, just maximizing what they currently own. So from the realtor's perspective, maybe that would be like capital improvements. There's certain capital improvements like moving washer, dryer, hookups inside the unit because a tenant will pay more rent as opposed to having to go outside the building or down the street to the laundry room. So under that idea of maximization, what are some things you see landlords do that actually hit their cash flow? Some blunders that they make that actually have them take steps backwards when they so that they can't move forward.
There's a false economy that some landlords follow, which is the least amount of money I can spend on the property, the better. And it's not true. You can rent the property for more if it's painted, if it's properly landscaped, put in flowers, do things that are good. If there's tired lawn furniture or tired pool furniture, put in new pool furniture, buy a new barbecue, set up new benches, do things that make the property nice. Make sure everything in the apartment unit is working properly. Things should not be broken. Window latches, door latches. If you've got an old thermostat that doesn't look good, put in a Nest thermostat. Do something that makes the place special. These tenant improvements that show for which tenants will pay more rent when they move in, pay. The rate of return, if it's done properly on those sorts of tenant improvements, goes anywhere from 10 or 15% on the low side to 25 to 40% a year cash flow, cash on cash return on increased investment. And so if you want to attract a better form of tenant, a tenant who will behave better, who will treat your property better, who will be easier to get along with, and probably just a higher line tenant, offer something that appeals to a higher line tenant. If you're going to try to do the cheapest, lousiest, oldest, dirtiest, most tired and boring apartment, you're going to get a tenant that's going to fit right in.
And so the next pillar is growth. Many of our clientele are close associates and investors we work with. They don't have big injections of cash every year. So as the saying goes, they're equity rich, cash poor, but they have aspirations of growing. So my argument now is with rent control, 1031 exchange is even that much more important because instead of being limited to 5% plus CPI, you can actually do an exchange and say grow your income by 15, 20, 25% net income. You own a lot of units. Is that a good argument that I'm making that, hey, this is now one way to leapfrog this cap on rents and increase your income at a faster rate?
Yes, and the reason is that if you expand your holdings, if what you can do is put yourself in a broader footing, if you can turn a 2-unit building into a 10-unit building through an exchange with tax deferral, then the result is you're going to have a broader footing. We live in a country where complete strangers will buy real estate for you. And those complete strangers are called tenants. And you have to serve those tenants. Those tenants are your customers. You have to deal fairly and openly and directly with them. But if you have more tenants paying rent toward a larger building, the economies of scale will prevail and you'll just make more money.
And then the third pillar of building this financial legacy I coined as preparing for tomorrow. Many of them are preparing for their heirs, preparing the portfolio so that when the heirs take over, it's that much larger, or the income, the infrastructure. From the legal side of it, though, as people look down the road, again, assuming this is going to be the vast majority of their retirement, what are, say, 2 or 3 tips that you can share to keep themselves out of the courtroom so that down the road, what they assumed was going to be a certain amount of holdings and equity doesn't get taken away?
Solve problems. If you have problems and you let those problems sit, whether they be with tenants or the physical structure of the property or a neighborhood that's deteriorating and you need to get out of it, solve those problems. Don't live with them. Don't make little changes that make them a little more tolerable. Solve them. So if you have bad problems with the building, if you have for example, just one example, a roof that's leaking that you're repairing every single year, consider tearing it off and putting on a whole new roof. If you make improvements and repairs to your property as if you're going to own it for 20 or 30 years, it pays off. And it pays off in bottom line numbers today. It pays off ultimately for your heirs, and it pays off in cash flow down the road. Those are good investments to make.
And a lot of our clients own, say, a 5-unit building, a 10-unit building. They hear 2,000 and they just can't fathom, that size of ownership. And not that they want to own 2,000, but even if they say they want to own 50 or 100, what's some insight you could share with them on that path to growth?
A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. The largest brick wall in the world was built one brick at a time. What you do is you get your first property and then you do it like a stamp collection. You just keep collecting. And the more you do it, the better you get. The more you learn from it, the better experiences you have. The more you treat your tenants as your customers who you want to have happy, the more respect you'll automatically show them, the more courtesy you'll show them, the better they'll treat you. It's not always true, and there are exceptions, and there are difficult tenants who need to be evicted, and you'll evict them. But for the most part, if you have good relations with those tenants, and if you continue to maintain your building in a solid way, it pays off.
Now, at our educational luncheon, towards the end of the forum, Steve fields questions from the attendees like yourself. And it's really an opportunity to have a free consultation, as we always coin it, with a lawyer. And Steve truly does take as many questions as he can in the time allotted. And so we brought a few samples here today that Steve's going to answer for us. So this is a new one that I hadn't thought of, and I emailed you a couple of weeks ago. Electric vehicles. If a tenant you have an exterior outlet and they plug in and are charging their vehicle, and you don't have any verbiage on your rental agreement, as I assume many don't, with respect to electric vehicles, what are you to do now?
So this assumes that the tenant is plugging in not in their unit or on their meter, but they're plugging into the common area. And the question is, do you have a duty as a landlord to maintain electrical availability out in the common area? And the answer is no. So if you have outlets which are somewhere that aren't being used, that are going to be that are subject to having people drive up and just plug their cars into them, that gets expensive. What you should do is either disable those plugs now before anyone uses them, or put them on some sort of a lockdown so you can control access to them. And then if someone wants to use common power, not on their meter, but on your overall house meter, then you can say, we'll rent that to you and here's the fee for it. If you have someone who wants to do that, then you can negotiate that and have a separate lease agreement with them for that electrical outlet, that they can use it for a particular car at a particular time. I think this is going to become a revenue source for landlords who are going to be able to install more plugs, not fewer, in the common areas so that people can conveniently plug in their electric cars It is the wave of the future. I drive an electric car myself, and once you go electric, you don't want to go back. And so a lot of tenants are going to find that it's more economical and practical, and this is an amenity that can be provided by a landlord for a fee. The other direction to go is to provide it without a fee. Put solar on the building, especially if you're in a sunny area like Southern California, where the payback on electrical on solar panels is huge. It's probably as good an investment as an apartment building, and you can do that and provide it as an amenity to attract better tenants when you're renting.
Late payments. So let's say you're a landlord who collects rent through a P.O. box, and the rent's not there on the 1st. You issue a 3-day pay or quit. If you're collecting through a P.O. box, though, and you issue the 3-day pay or quit, how do you gauge the rent didn't show up at the P.O. box on the 3rd day? You actually have to give them an address they physically can walk into. When you're collecting rent like that, how do you monitor the late period?
So the problem is it's very, very difficult. You either have to have, and some of these operate this way, where there are payment portals. I'm not talking about a physical post office box, but a payment portal online where people can pay. You can shut that down so that once you've given them the 3-day notice and the 3rd day has come and gone, you can shut down the portal so they cannot pay after that, and you can evict them. If you are talking about monitoring to a regular physical post office box, the only way to monitor is to go look at it and find out. My suggestion is, if you have difficult paying clients, don't let it go. The worst thing you can do as a landlord is let a tenant get behind in rent. The tenant has only a few duties, just 2. One is pay the rent. The other one is don't destroy my property. And if they can't do both of those, then they shouldn't be tenants. And if you have someone who's perennially late, if you have someone who is late and tells you a story that they need to have you lend them, in effect, the rent for a month or 2, you've got a hard business decision to make, because you want to have compassion for your fellow person, and at the same time you're running a business. So it might be better if you evict a non-paying tenant, get a tenant in who's paying the rent, and if you feel like doing charity, give that money to the person you evicted. But don't have your unit as a charity case. That's not the purpose of it.
Let's say a rodent problem. Tenant calls you, there's mice in the unit, so you call an extermination company. You have invoices to show that they were on the site or what have you, but for whatever reason, you just can't get rid of these rodents. Say you use a couple companies. Is it a habitability issue? Can it, if you're dragged in front of the judge, is that enough that you hired a third-party service and you've done what you can?
No, you have to do more than you have to fix it. And so part of the problem could be a tenant's living standards. If they're leaving food all over, you have to do an inspection of your tenant's unit, find out if they're contributing to the problem. And if they are, you need to tell them in writing that that's a problem, that they're creating a problem. But you need to hire the proper people and solve those problems. You cannot have people living with rodents or roaches or anything else. It's part of habitability. No judge is going to be sympathetic to the idea that, well, I did my best and you still have insects and rodents and you're living with them. The judges are simply not going to look fondly on that.
Steve, thank you, sir.
Chris, thank you.
Always very insightful.
My pleasure.
Our next event, our Apartment Owners Educational Luncheon, will be Thursday, March 19th. If you're watching this video, that means we're just days away from the RSVP being completely full, because as it's full every time. We implore you to attend if you've never attended before and have your questions answered and really gain insight into all the issues that are affecting landlords at this time. Chris German from the Apartment Dealer wishing you positive cash flow, tenants who behave, and much protection from eviction courts and everyone else. Thank you.